Assalamualaikum and a very good morning or afternoon everyone. Today's presentation we look at ecosystem-based management or EBM in the Lower Kinabatangan Wildlife Sanctuary, or commonly known as LKWS, one of the most ecologically significant yet heavily pressured landscape in Sabah, Borneo. The LKWS is located in northeastern Sabah along the Kinabatangan River, Malaysia's second longest river, stretching 560 kilometers. The sanctuary covers around 27,000 hectares, but importantly, it is not one continuous block of forest. It's made up of 10 separate lots scattered along the river, and it was officially gazetted in 2005 under the Wildlife Conservation Enactment of 1997, and today it holds the status of Malaysia's largest Ramsar site and recognized internationally as a wetland of major ecological importance. What makes this landscape so unique and so complex to manage is the mix of ecosystem types packed into a relatively small fragmented area. There are freshwater lakes and swamps formed as the river shifts course over time. There's a riparian and freshwater swamp forest lining the riverbanks. Further inland, drier lowland forests dotted with sandstones and limestone hills. And near the river mouth, mangrove forests that protect the coastline from erosions and serve as nurseries for marine life. So the challenge is that much of the floodplain surrounding these protected lots has already been converted to oil palm plantation. That leaves the sanctuary as a patchwork of forest fragments embedded in a heavily modified agricultural landscape. And that fragmentation is precisely the problem that ecosystem-based management approaches here are trying to solve. Before we get into the management strategies themselves, it's worth understanding just how much biodiversity is at stake. The LKWS is one of only 2 places in the world where 10 different primate species coexist in the same landscape, including the Bornean orangutan and the proboscis monkey, a species found nowhere else on Earth but only in Borneo. Beyond primates, the sanctuary supports a populations of Bornean pygmy elephants, a major conservation priority whose biggest threats are habitat loss and fragmentation from the surrounding plantation. Bird diversity is also exceptionally high across the forest, wetland and lake edge habitats. The area supports important herpetofauna and aquatic species dependent on the lakes and swamps, sensitive carnivores like clouded leopard, which avoid oil palm areas entirely, and riparian plant communities that stabilize riverbanks and sustain wildlife. This combination of habitat diversity and species richness is exactly why LKWS is such a high priority for conservation, and why managing it is not just about protecting individual species, but about managing an entire interconnected ecosystem under mounting pressure. And that's the foundation we will build on as we move into the specific EBM strategy being applied here.
Alright guys, the establishment of the Lower Kinabatangan Wildlife Sanctuary have hold many key pillars of importance to an animal. Now I will explain to you one by one. Alright, firstly, as one of the biggest biodiversity, it is responsible to become a home for a certain species that can be found nowhere else on Earth. There are so many wildlife that being conserved while being a specimen for many science research, such as the Bornean orangutan, pygmy elephant, proboscis monkey, rhinoceros hornbill, and estuarine crocodile. Alright, next is the connectivity of animal can be created because most of the endangered species here are being struck by the fragmentation of the forest. So with this initiative, it helps the genetic health to maintain, as the mixed pool gene can occur between the animal and it can avoid any weak inbreeding offspring. It can also help the migration of certain animals between 2 points. Another importance is to maintaining the vital ecosystem services By this, the ecosystem can help mitigate many natural disasters such as the flood, since the soil of the forest at Lower Kinabatangan Wildlife Sanctuary can act as the sponge, avoiding lot of water got into urban places during heavy rain. And another importance is to support the sustainable community livelihood. The presence of this reserve forest brings many tourists annually, as they would like to see the richness in biodiversity. So this open up many job opportunities to the orang sungai or the local people. It also gives a chance to public join any program like replanting the tree, ensuring we as human will have contribution in maintaining the ecosystem. So all of the activities will bring more awareness in the community to protect our ecosystem.
Good day everyone, today I will be presenting the method used for ecosystem management in the Lower Kinabatangan Wildlife Sanctuary, Sabah. The first method is the protected area management. The sanctuary is managed by the Sabah Wildlife Department, which enforces law to protect wildlife and their habitats. Activities such as illegal logging, hunting, poaching and land clearing are prohibited, while regular patrols are carried out to ensure the area remains protected. The second method is the habitat restoration and reforestation. Over the years, some forest areas have been degraded due to the logging and the expansion of the oil palm plantation. To restore this habitat, native tree species are planted to reconnect fragmented forests. These provide foods, shelters, and breeding sites for wildlife while improving overall ecosystem health. And another important strategy is the development of wildlife corridors. These corridors connect isolated forest patches, allowing animals such as the Borneo orangutan, Borneo pygmy elephants, and the proboscis monkey to move safely between habitats. Wildlife corridors reduce habitat fragmentation, promote genetic diversity, and help minimize human-wildlife conflict. The sanctuary also conduct a biodiversity monitoring and a scientific research. Researchers will use methods such as the camera traps, boat surveys, bird surveys, vegetation assessment, and water quality monitoring to track wildlife populations and evaluate the condition of the ecosystem. The information collected will help guide the future conservation and the management decision. Another key method is the community-based conservation, which is the local communities will actively participate in the conservation through ecotourism, tree planting programs, environmental education, and the reporting illegal activities. Their involvement not only to protect the environment but also to create sustainable source of income. In addition, sustainable ecotourism management helps balance conservation with the economic developments. Activities such as guided wildlife boat cruises are carefully managed to reduce disturbance to animals while generating income that supports conservation programs and benefits local communities. And finally, law enforcement and stakeholder collaboration are essential. Wildlife rangers regularly patrol the sanctuary to prevent poaching, illegal logging, and encroachment. At the same time, the Sabah Wildlife Department works closely with the conservation organizations, researchers, universities, and local communities to strengthen conservation efforts through research, funding, education, and habitat restoration.
Moving on to the challenges in the ecosystem management. So our first major management challenge is extreme habitat fragmentation and also population collapse. So the structural threat here is that the sanctuary is not a single continuous forest. Instead, it is highly fragmented into over 20 isolated parcels, so completely hemmed in and intersected by commercial oil palm estates. So to see the severe consequences of this fragmentation, I have looked into the work of Dr. Mohd and their Hutan team. So their long-term monitoring shows a devastating 30% population collapse among our Bornean orangutans over the last 2 decades. As unprotected forest canopies outside the sanctuary borders vanish, their numbers plummeted from around 1,125 individuals down to fewer than 800. So they are quite literally running out of canopy, forcing isolated subpopulations into dangerous genetic bottlenecks. Now, if we look at our larger megafauna, we encounter our second challenge, which is the elephant compression effect and seasonal flooding. So when looking at the data, there is a dangerous trap, which what we call the myth of population growth. So local bunny elephant, their numbers have actually risen from 100 to nearly 300 individuals. But some research shows that this isn't a natural population boom. It is a compression effect. So elephants are being forcibly squeezed out of surrounding lands into the remaining protected fragments. This becomes a full-blown crisis during the peak monsoon season. Severe flooding shrinks the available dry land for these elephants from 400 kilometers square down to just 61 kilometers square. So this spikes their population density to among the highest in the world, forcing 300 massive mammals into immediate violent daily conflict with neighboring villages and corporate oil palm fences. The logical management response to this compression is to reconnect the fragments, which bring us to the reforestation parallels in degraded landscapes. So we realize that restoration isn't as simple as planting a tree. We face severe ecological roadblocks. The soils here are highly compacted from historic logging and predictable seasonal floods that can drown entire plots of young seedlings at night. So we are battling severe microclimatic changes because the forest edges are so dried up from fragmentation. So highly invasive Imbrata cylindrica, or we call it as a land grass, has taken over. So these introduce an unnatural, dangerous wildfire risk to a historical wetland ecosystem. So this thick grass also stops natural seed dispersal by wind or birds entirely, forcing manual, labor-intensive nursery rearing. So, successful habitat connection cannot rely on simple feel-good tree planting initiatives. It requires intensive, highly costly multi-year maintenance just to keep the synchrony alive. Finally, we face a massive administrative headache that we call fragmented governance. So the biggest challenge on the ground is that wildlife doesn't care about human borders. So an elephant or orangutan doesn't know where the protected sanctuary ends and private property begins. So because over 85% of the land surrounding our sanctuary fragments is privately owned. So managing this ecosystem requires dealing with hundreds of different landowners who all have completely different priorities. So a plantation owner wants to maximize their own palm harvest. A local villagers wants to protect their backyard crops. And while researchers want to plant trees. So getting everyone to agree on how to share the space is incredibly difficult.
In conclusion, LKWS is an extraordinarily rich but fragmented landscape. 10 scattered forest lots hemmed in by oil palm plantation, yet home to 10 primate species and a huge range of ecosystem. The fragmentation is why ecosystem-based management matters here. The threats facing LKWS are interconnected, so managing the floodplain as one system, not isolated patches, is essential. As we've heard, this only works through collaboration with the government agencies, plantation companies, researchers, and local communities. All of them need to stay engaged for corridors, restoration, and biosphere zoning to succeed. And because land pressures and threats keep shifting, this is not a problem that gets solved once. Management has to keep adapting. LKWS shows us both what's at stake: a truly unique ecosystem and what it takes to protect it, sustain collaborative and adaptive management. So I think that's all from us. Thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum.